So I just made some coffee. I'm a little bit scatterbrained because I was rushing to make coffee and I totally messed it up, but it still came out pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're just going to get started and I'm going to talk about some of the questions that I've received and we'll just work off of that. I've got a list of questions. If you guys have any questions, I am taking more questions in HipChat, and I've posted the link on HipChat on the Google Plus page and the YouTube page. So if you just look at the comments, you should see a link. I'm using HipChat because it's easier to get instant feedback than it is with the YouTube comments. So post something there and I can see it right away. Otherwise, if you post it on the YouTube, it's delayed like a minute and then I respond to you and it's delayed another minute for you to actually see my response. So that is one thing to keep in mind as we're sort of working through this. All right, so let's get started. One of the first questions I got this past week was from Abdullah, and he wants to know what these courses are covering, for what level, and how many minutes for each course. So he's talking specifically about the Kickstarter project. And what I have here, this is sort of a follow-up from my Kickstarter project from last year. I ran a successful Kickstarter project, and that was to create new course materials to really beef up what I had been doing online with some live courses that were decent, but they weren't great. And so this year I want to sort of follow that up and create a whole new set of courses that are teaching Swift, which I wasn't expecting at WWDC, but I think it's a really good direction for Apple. And so that's sort of the direction of this. And now there are 4 courses that I'll be teaching. Let me just share this screen and see if this works. So I know the Kickstarter page might be a little bit confusing, so I just want to go over this real quick to clear up what the different levels do. So if we hide this, so this is the Kickstarter project, and there are these classes along the top that you can see, and I think you can see my mouse. Gotta move this around a little bit. All right, so here, yes, I can see my mouse. Here we have the different courses. Now there's 4 new courses that I want to make this year, and that's what this Kickstarter is all about. It's about learning how to program Swift, which is the first course right here. That's going to be starting October 6th. Then there's going to be a games course that's going to follow that up about a week later. Now, these first 2 courses, actually these first 3 courses, the Swift iOS app and the Swift iOS game and the real world apps, those 3 courses are all going to have official start dates, and they're going to be more interactive than my previous courses from last year or the courses that you've seen on my website. So these courses are going to be 31-day format, and what that means is that the course is going to run for 31 days, and what is included are 20 lessons. So you'll get 20 video lessons, and the plan for that is to watch those once a day, Monday through Friday. So think of this as an intensive course that you're going to be starting in October, on October 6th, and in November on the 17th. And there's going to be a daily activity, there's going to be a daily lesson, and there's going to be a daily Q&A where I go over different topics. The 4th course, which I added, is the Apple Watch course. And I added that because I think the Apple Watch is going to change the way we start to interact with our smart devices. It's got more sensors in it. It's looking pretty compelling, especially because it's got the haptic feedback, and that's something that I've been waiting for Apple to get into. So that is the sort of set of courses that I'll be starting, and that Apple Watch course is going to start. that is going to start sometime in the spring. I don't have an exact date because Apple hasn't posted an exact date. So that's what this Kickstarter is all about. It's just getting started with Swift. These are beginner courses. They're not going to go super in depth in the first two courses with the topics. The game course is going to build on the first course, so it's going to teach you the basics of programming if you don't already know it. And in terms of content-wise, his next question was how many hours of content. I'm planning on around 20 hours of content for both the first two courses, and then it's probably going to be 10 to 20 hours for the second and third courses. So if you want to get an idea of how many hours of content I had with my existing course, I have, I think, 40 hours between 5 different courses. So I'm expecting it to be on par with that. All right, so the next question is from How. He wants to know about iPad apps and if that's something that I'm going to be teaching. And the answer is yes. And it's probably going to be either in the later portion of the first course, or it will be in the game course that I'll get into it along with the real world apps course. And the reason I'm doing that is because I think it's really important to start as quickly as possible to get your first app working. And so in the first course, I want to focus just on iPhone apps. And Apple's made it a little bit more challenging, I would say, to get started with iPhone apps because now there's different sizes. So we'll be focusing on just a sort of a one size app to begin with, just to get you started, just to have something that you could run on your phone. And then later on in the courses that I'm publishing, I will get more into Apple iPad development, and that is changing from what it is right now. So currently, one of the issues with iPad development is that you have to write custom code. It's basically two different code sets that run depending on what device you have. And with the new sizes of the iPhone, there's new logic that's being added to Xcode so that you don't have to manually write all this code and you don't have to worry about it not executing or executing. I have several apps that are iPad and iPhone compatible, and you have to test it on each device to know if it's going to work right. And if you have special logic for one or the other, then you have to test to make sure that works. Apple's simplifying that a little bit, so I'm excited for that. The next question from How is, he wants to know if the 199 early bird friends includes all 7 courses. Yes, it includes the complete bundle. I sort of messed up on the reward text, I guess, for that one. I wasn't anticipating adding all these extra courses with the Apple Watch and everything coming out. So I have gone ahead and I added a new reward level that makes it more clear. And it includes all the courses. Any of the 149 reward level tiers and up will give you everything that this Kickstarter is about. So if you do that, you'll get everything. And the friends thing is for you and a friend so that you can learn together with someone else. And I think it's really important to have a support structure either with me through email support or other people. It's going to make it more effective to learn. And the next question I have, another question from How is, he wants to know if he has a 14-year-old son who's interested in making iPhone apps, and he wants to know, should he learn Objective-C first? And my response would be no, learn Swift first because it's going to be easier to pick up. There's new tools that make it a nicer experience, especially with the playgrounds in Xcode 6. And that's something that I will be discussing in the courses. The playgrounds is basically a code editing environment where you can test out stuff without having to create a whole Xcode project. Now, it is good, but it sort of doesn't give you an idea of how something's going to work in an iPhone app 100%. So when you're in the playgrounds, it's sort of experimental. And when you actually want to go to make the app, you can copy a lot of the code that you have there. But some of the behaviors between resource loading, like loading images, in my own experiences have been a little bit different. So it's just a place to experiment with some code quickly and learn a little bit. So I think that's an effective tool for really learning Swift If you want to do contract work, if you want to work for a big company that already has an app built in Objective-C, or you want to work with open source Objective-C code, which there's a lot of stuff out there that can make it so that you can make apps faster, then it also makes sense to learn Objective-C, which is why I included the first 2 courses that I published last year on Objective-C so that you can get started with that. I think that's a really good starting point for that. Okay, so the next question. This one's from Andrew. He has no experience programming, and he's wondering where his question is. Okay, so his big issue is he's been following along. He's been typing the code. He's right now doing the Objective-C course that I launched last year. So he's just learning some of the programming basics. And he wants to know where to put the code and how I know where to put the code. And so this is something that just comes with experience. This is something that just comes from doing it a lot of different times. When you're first getting started, you're going to be making a lot of different apps that do silly things. They're going to do one little thing. They're not going to be super complex. So you'll just get into the habit of putting code in certain places. And so you'll learn where the code goes. Now, if we look at Xcode real quick, I can show you where this code is going with Swift. So let's just pull that up. So we are seeing Xcode right here. Now, on the left here, I'm working on a blog post I'll be posting today that goes over sort of how to look at Xcode. So I think that'll be helpful for anyone who wants to get started. But on the left here, we have our project navigator. That is this little folder icon. That's going to have all of your things. So this is a big panel on the left side. It has all our resources. It has 2 code files right now, which are these 2 files. Then it has a storyboard file, which is our interface file. It has images.xc assets. This is our asset catalog. This is for something like your app icon or any resources that you want to load. And there's this new thing called the launch screen XIB. This is what a user sees when they first start your app. So in terms of where to put code, there's 2 distinct things that you need to think about when you have an app. When the app first starts, your app delegate code is going to run. So this is appdelegate.swift. And in here, we have a bunch of functions. Now, these functions are blocks or chunks of code that are going to run in certain situations. So this first method that we see here is did launch with options or did finish launching with options. This is going to be the start of your application. So anytime you need to query a database or load some resources up before your app is ready to go, that's where you can put code in between these curly braces. So everything when we're working in Swift, when we're in our iPhone apps, we're going to put them between these curly braces. And if you hover over on the left side here, you can see the curly braces. This is the chunk of code that runs when you first tap on an app. Now, there's other functions that can run when you're going into the background mode or when your app is about to restart up again after it's already been open. So that's what all of these functions are for. These are basically hooks that allow you to customize the behavior of your app when it first starts. Now, the next thing that you'll get into is anytime you have multiple screens, you are going to have different view controllers. And so a view controller you can think of as just a single screen. And in this case, I created a single view application. So this has one screen. And within this screen, we can have different methods and we can put things in here. Now, this is a little bit different than Objective-C. Instead of having 2 code files that you have to manage, you have 1 code file. So I think it's way better because you don't have to keep things in sync and you don't need to worry about where to put it. So then it sort of becomes, okay, where am I going to put my code? And so the big thing when a screen starts is this Viewdidload method. The Viewdidload method is the first thing, pretty much the first thing that gets called when this screen is going to appear. So if I go ahead and I hit run on this, it's going to make my simulator pop up. Now you can't see the simulator until I show it to you. So let me resize it and then I'll switch screens. I'm going to switch over to the simulator. I got the juggle just so that you can see this without being super tiny. So here's the app running. It's just a simple little app that I created, and it's got some text fields where you can enter some text, and you can enter an email address or something like that down here. So you can just type, and you get suggestions with the new keyboard here. So that's the app running. And the code that we run when it first starts, that's going to be in the view controller class. So that's a little bit of an overview of how it all works with Xcode and where you can place code. So remember, when your app first starts or when it stops, that's where you're going to put logic for the app delegate. So if you need to save stuff, if you need to load stuff, you might put it there. Or when a screen appears, if there's a database that you're querying or anything that you need to do to populate information on that screen, you might do a database call here as well. So it's really up to you to decide where you want to do it. My recommendation for you is just to pick a spot and go with it. If you worry too much about where the optimal place to put code is, you're probably spending too much time on it. So put it in Viewdidload and see if it works. If you want to do something based on user feedback, like when a button is pressed, you can put code in here. So I can do something like print ln, which is print line. I can say, hi, Paul. So if I do that and I run this with the play button in the top left corner, we're going to see that when my app is visible, I'm going to hit the button, submit, and you're going to see that hi, Paul appears on the bottom right corner. So, and I can press the button multiple times. So right now you can't see my iPhone, but I'm pressing the button and it is displaying that message multiple times. So what we have down here is our console and our variables view. So this is the debug area. And there's these little toggles in the bottom right corner that allow you to show or hide these different things. Most of the time I hide the variables view unless I'm searching for a bug, and I just have the console output. And this is just for your own sanity checks. You can check to see if your app's running correctly. When you click on a button, you can get real-time sort of feedback. All right. So I do think it's really good that you are trying this out, Andrew. Typing in the code, following along is really important to understanding the materials. In terms of your next question, Andrew, what course is best to start? I think that if you have a lot of time before the first 31-day course starts on October 6th, that you should start the Objective-C introductory course. I think that will give you some background insight. Even if you're just listening to it, you're not really following along. You'll hear a lot of the keywords, you'll hear a lot of different explanations, which will help you in the learning process, understanding how all this code works. So it's okay to be confused. You're going to have new terms that you're going to be listening to. I highly recommend getting a notebook and just writing down a new term and then searching it on Google or trying to see in the lecture materials that I provide if you can figure out what that is. Okay. All right, so the next question is from Hauk, and he wants to know, are there going to be APIs in the first course? Yes, there will be some APIs in the first course. The extent of them is going to be a little bit limited. And I say that because there's a lot of beginner topics that I want to go over about programming in general, and some of those are going to be supplemented by the APIs that you can use in apps, but it's not going to be the focus to really dive deep. So if you want to learn more about the APIs for working with advanced stuff, that's really going to come in the game course. That'll get into some more game-specific things that you can do with the APIs, like working with Swift, working with the physics engine, working with particle effects, loading different screens, doing game saving and loading. That type of thing will be in the second course. Now, the third course is going to be a different course. It's going to sort of follow the process of creating an app and submitting it on the App Store. Now, I don't have details on what that app will be just yet because it's going to be based on the feedback from the Kickstarter backers. So we're going to sort of pick a direction to go with that. I'm right now leaning towards some kind of alarm clock or coffee app because I want to make something that I'm going to use every day, and I want to make something that you might use every day. So that's the goal with that, and to really show you the whole process of submitting a new app on the App Store so that you can really get started with app development. So that will get into more APIs, and I want to incorporate working with web services. So it's not just the local SDK APIs, it's also going to include some kind of web service, which might be with CloudMine or Parse or Apple's new Cloud Kit, which can help you just get started with an app quicker. All right, and one more, let's see, we got a question from Caleb. He wants to know how to work with the main storyboard in Xcode 6 to fit the simulator when we build apps. So one of the big issues I have with Xcode 6 is the new sort of layout for apps. If I switch over, is my screen sharing? I see a new button on, Google Hangouts that I haven't seen before. It says present to everyone. So I'm assuming that you are watching that screen. Okay, it looks like it is sharing. I don't know what this new button is. It says present to everyone, and it's already presenting to everyone. Okay, so with this, when we load up the storyboard file, the new thing that you'll see here is that there's this bar across the bottom, and it's got this weird thing. So when you first start a new iPhone app, it's going to look something like this. It's not going to look like an iPhone. It's not going to look like an iPad. It's sort of this strange shape device, and it's because the new approach for making apps is to do sort of layout of components relative to each other and the edges of the screen, and really make it adapt to any size. So it's about building a responsive iPhone app, sort of like how you build responsive website apps. Now, this is a little bit strange because if you just want to focus on iPhone, you actually have to click on this where it says any, and I don't think you can see the pop-up. Awesome. All right, 1 second. Let me share my screen. This might work better. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the same thing. I'm sharing the screen now so you can see the menu bar and everything else, and you can see pop-ups, which you can't see when I'm just sharing a single screen. So this anything is kind of weird. It allows you to create a layout that works for an iPhone or a little pop-up that could be on an iPad or an iPhone, or it could be for an iPad, or it could be an iPad landscape. And so there's all these different things. So when you get started, you can either turn it to one of these settings, and then you can drag and drop your UI. The other thing that you can do here is you can disable it. And I'm not sure if I disable it, if I can revert back. So let's just try this out. Now, I like to see, for me, at least when I'm working on some of the beginner apps, I like to see what the app's going to look like. And one of the things you can do here is if you select this file and you have this assistant editor or the utilities panel pop up, there is this file tab. This is the file inspector. And there's this new option underneath use auto layout, which I do recommend using, but there's this size classes thing. And that's where this any and this compact thing come in. So if you click on that, it's going to give you a big warning, and you can say disable size classes. And now you see what looks like an iPhone 5 screen. we click on the dimensions, this is an iPhone 5 screen. So if you go down this route, I'm not really sure how it works with the new iPhone sizes. So that's the downside of doing this. But if you just have an iPhone 5 and this makes it easier for you to see what's going on, I think this is a good approach because it's less work to actually get the app working, and you can adjust it so that it actually fits on the screen. Now, as you can see, this was designed for a different one. I'm going to see if I can undo that change. Okay, so I undid the change. So you can undo the change to turn size classes off, and now it's back on. So if we run it, it's going to look the same. I'll bring the simulator over. You couldn't see that. So it's being clipped because if you compare the sizes here, the iPhone 6 Plus screen is way bigger than the iPhone 5 screen. So it's a ginormous screen. And that's sort of what size classes are. So that's a way to work around it. Now, what you should be doing with these size classes is you should be sort of designing the UI and setting up your auto layout constraints. And auto layout constraints are something that I'm going to get into in the first course, and that's about saying, okay, I want this element to be fixed to the left side. So you click on it and you drag and you say, okay, I want this to be the leading space of the container margin. So that's going to set up this edge here, and I want this to be horizontally spaced from this component. And so it's all about describing the layout in relation to the edges of the screen and other components. And so here I can set up the trailing, and then I think the last thing we need to do is set up the distance from the top. So we'll do the distance from the top, and this one will make sure that this is centered with the Y, and so we'll go with that. So now you see that instead of having orange constraints, which are those initial lines that we have blue, and that's good. So now if we run this, you'll see that the name has its ending right on this side, and so it's taking into account the different sizes. If I were to change the screen size, let's see if this works on the 6 Plus, and we run this, we should see that that edge is lined up correctly. And you can see it right here. It's really faint to look at. If I change the background color, we can make this more obvious. So that is with a dark gray background. And you can see how it's behaving the same where it's lined up on that edge. All right, so if you guys have more questions, just post them in the HIP chat link that I shared, and I can answer them. I'm going to check real quick to see if there's any questions on YouTube or the page, and I'm not seeing any, so it looks like you guys are just watching, which is fine. All right, so that's a little bit about that. Now, the other question I think that was related to that from Caleb was about resizing the phone when you're actually running it on the computer. Now, this new thing that happens with the simulators, you no longer see the outline of an iPhone. It's just this window. And there are 3 different scales that you can run at. You can do 100%, 75%, and 50%. So if I go 100%, you can see that this is a huge screen. This is bigger than my screen that I'm currently sharing, which I believe is at 1280 by 800. So the new iPhone screen is pretty big. And I lost Xcode. So that is 100%. If we pull that up again, we can change this using the keyboard shortcuts with the command 1, 2, or 3 to shrink it down. So if you make it 2 or 3, it's gonna almost fit. This is still bigger than the screen, so I'm gonna have to shrink this down all the way to the 50%, which is command 3, which you can see right here. So that is how you can work with it, because these things are really big. They're bigger than a lot of the displays you have. And right now, even if I had this on a Thunderbolt display, the size of the iPhone in the vertical direction is just huge compared to the screen size of a normal computer. All right, so Geneva has a question. She wants to know how easy it is to program in Swift. Is the coding different? I would say it's going to be easier. Right now, it's going to be a little bit harder just because there's not a whole lot of documentation on it and there's not a whole lot of help out there, and it's just been sort of finalized. So at this current point, it's going to be a little bit of a struggle, but once this course starts, it's going to be a lot easier to get started because I'm going to have more materials for you to look at, and I'll be helping you along the way. So I think that this course that I'm doing at Kickstarter is really going to help you get started with app development. The point is to have a mixture of live and sort of recorded courses so that you can spend the right amount of time on a topic. So, and the coding is different. It's a different language. If you look at it right now, it looks a little bit more like JavaScript or Ruby or Python to some extent. And I think that's going to make it easier and more approachable to people because a lot of people have background in other programming languages, and this new syntax looks more familiar. The Objective-C syntax, I think, was a little bit off-putting because it has lots of braces on it. So that is the nice thing about this. All right, Derek, we're up to one of your questions. I see that you have another question. I'm going to go over the one that you asked first. So you were talking about, maybe you can clarify if you fix this. You're working on the decision-making challenge from the first Objective-C course, and you couldn't get anything to output to the log. So one of the things you want to double check is to make sure that you have the log window open. So I'm going to show you right here. I'm running the project. I see my iPhone app, and I see the output log down here. Now, if I switch back to the simulator, when I press the submit button, you're going to see a message appear on the bottom. Now, if I accidentally hit this little button down here in the bottom right corner, this is the variables view, I'm not going to see any output here. And if I accidentally turn off the console view, which is the bottom right corner, now when I press that button, if I switch back to the simulator, I hit submit, I see no output down here. And that's because I'm just looking at the variables view. And you can see that with this little icon. So double check to see if that was the issue. Otherwise, I would restart Xcode. Sometimes Xcode behaves weird. And a lot of times, a solution that has worked for me for the past 4 years has been to just quit and start it up again. All right, so now I have another question. This is from Yuri, and he wants to know why he doesn't have the option for the action when he's trying to do the code connection. So he's right now working on the interface for an app. So let me pull up the main storyboard file. So this is his potential interface. I'm going to change the background so it's a little bit, we'll just go back to white. So that should be a little easier to see. I didn't like the super dark background. Maybe we could do something different. If I pull up the color picker, I can do a slight gray. I think that would be a little bit nicer. So we have the interface here. Now I'm going to switch into the assistant editor mode, and that is this little tuxedo icon up top in the top right. You click on this, you can see both the interface file, and you sort of have to juggle things around a little bit, especially if you have a small screen like I have right now. And I'm going to turn off this side panel with this top right button. And I'm going to turn off this right panel with this top right button. So here I can make connections between what I have on the left and my code. And so you get different sort of context sensitive auto completions. I can right click and drag to connect this email label to my code file. And so this is the question that he has, is he only sees the outlet and the outlet collection and not the action, which allows you to respond to things. Well, the thing is, this is a UI label over here, and a label does not have an action associated with it. So that's why you don't see action here. You can only do an outlet for the label. Now, if you have something like a button, I'll hit cancel here. You right click and drag. you'll see that the pop-up says insert outlet action or outlet connection, and the action is now visible in this drop-down menu. So if I want to do an action and say submit pressed, I can add that. Okay. Next, Derek, you had another question. I want to address this one before we get to your new one. You asked about supplemental iPhone app courses. There's some courses on Udemy and other websites, and I'll just go over those. So let me switch screens. Let's switch over. I think it's important to learn from whatever resource is going to work best for you. So if you don't learn from my materials, don't waste your time continuing to learn. Find something that works better. So I'm gonna be honest, like I want you to learn how to make an iPhone app, and if my materials aren't good enough, then you're gonna need to look for other resources that can help you. So one you might want to check out is called teamtreehouse.com. So just Google Treehouse, you'll find it, and their website's teamtreehouse.com. This is a great site. This has a subscription trial. It's a 14-day free trial. You can try it out, see if you like their iPhone courses. It's a little hard to get to their iOS stuff without actually creating an account. If I click on this button, it'll ask you to sign up. It's $25 a month or $49 a month, depending on which trial sort of you go with. You do have to put down a credit card to get started. So that's one option. Another option is going to be onemonth.com. They're working on a new Swift course. So right now they have a Ruby on Rails, HTML, Stripe payments. They're doing a really good job right now with their online courses. They have this new iOS course that is starting soon. And I don't know the exact launch date, but you can find out more information if you just go to ios.onemonth.com. So that's another one. I know Matan, he runs it. He's really good. He had one of the top courses on Skillshare where I was teaching my iPhone courses. So that is that one. I'm going to post these links in the chat too so that you guys can see this instead of having to squint and try to type along. So we have that. Another good one would be Code School. They have iOS stuff. They also have a bunch of other things just like Team Treehouse, so you can look at their iOS stuff. The nice thing that they have is they have this Try Objective-C course. This is free. You can try Objective-C code in the browser. I find it a little bit hard to work with, but this is something you could definitely check out to see if this is a resource that would help you. I personally think that when you're learning to make iPhone apps, it's better not to be writing code into a web browser. You should be writing code into Xcode because that is how you are going to submit your apps. And that's what people are going to pay you for. If you want to work for someone, they're going to want your experience working with Xcode, and that's something that you learn from using it. And so that's that. Let's go to the next one. So we also have lynda.com, a really big site, lots of different topics, and you can find their iPhone stuff if you just search iPhone. I believe they now have some Swift stuff. Could be wrong. Just search it. We get an iOS 7 course. So more options to learn from. I think they have a 7-day free trial. And Udemy has a bunch of courses. So I have some courses on Udemy that you can see. I've given you access to 2 of the courses that I've posted there, but there's other instructors who also teach on this platform. So if you're interested in iOS stuff, you can search development and then on their mobile apps, and you'll find a bunch of different courses. So this is one of my courses right here in the middle. And then there's Rick's course, which is on Swift. And then there's also Rob's course, which is also on Swift. So both of these guys also had Kickstarter projects. If you didn't see them, they had projects. I'm hoping that they'll do a good job. I know that they both have courses already on Udemy, which is a good thing. So that's good. And those are good places to learn. The last place that I'm going to point you to would be Big Nerd Ranch. Big Nerd Ranch writes a lot of books. Now, I have no idea what the status is of their new books for Swift. I know that Aaron tweeted that he'd have to write a new book, but I don't know if they posted any details about the upcoming book. So right now they just have the Objective-C programming and the iOS programming. Both of these are for Objective-C and not Swift. And then going on with what Derek said, the nice thing about Udemy is that there are discounts on a lot of these courses. So like when I first got to Udemy, there was an ad for a course that was on sale. So it's a plus and a minus. For you, it's a plus. For me, it's kind of a minus because they discount my courses a lot when they do promotions. But there's an option. You can take Rob's course for $29. So I think that's a really good deal because otherwise it's $199. And so these coupons aren't always up. So you can check it out here. If you click on it, you can read more. I think there's a little trial thing so you can test out the course, see if you like his teaching style. I think that's just good. So back to what I was saying, Derek, I think it's just important to try different things. I'm not saying that my courses are bad, but I think that if you want to learn effectively, you need to find out what resources can help you learn the different skills you want to learn, because other people are going to be teaching more topics than I'm going to teach initially, or they might have a different approach. So I think it's just good to have a good background on that. All right, so let's get to some of the questions that you have here, and let me just scroll up. All right, so Derek, you posted another question here. Your first question was, what app do I use for my coffee? I'll show you. It's not pretty. It's just development version, but it looks like this. So this is the app. This is just a quick little thing that I threw together. It's completely functional. It looks weird. There's a top and then there's a bottom portion. So the top part's what I'm using right now, and this is actually what helps me make really good coffee with Chemex, which you may have seen in the side shot. That's this thing right here. It's a pour over coffee thing. I use this little gooseneck kettle here, which is this. So it's basically a manual automatic machine, and that's me who's doing all the work. And I like it a lot because I can get much better coffee. So the way this app works is what you're seeing here is a timer and a weight. So everything here is very scientific. It's really a chemistry experiment. And with the app, you know how much to pour. So it's kind of like a ghost time. If you've ever played a race car game on a console, if you race against yourself, you can see a ghost lap, which is where you were driving around the corners and the turns, and you can sort of try and beat that or match that level of performance. So that's the coffee app that I'm working on. I'm going to reskin it so that it looks a lot better. I want to use something that's going to look more like a Chemex, and it's going to be animated so that you can see it filling up. Right now, though, it's worked for me, and I've been using it, I want to say, for 8 months, and I can't not use it. So if that makes any sense, I don't make coffee without it anymore. It's the one app I use all the time, and I really want to make an iWatch app for it because I'm afraid of pouring boiling water on my iPhone. And if I have an iWatch, I can have the timer on my wrist, and I don't have to worry about pouring boiling water on that because that's a lot harder. So next question. Derek, you're saying that you're a new developer here. You want to know what the most important concept to understand and get started on the right foot. I think the best thing that you can do when you're first starting is to just write code. It's really important to just type code. Don't copy and paste. You want to get into the habit of writing the code out by hand because that's going to help you understand how it all works. As you're writing code, you're going to have issues. You're going to have things that aren't working. And it's that process of failing to get something working and then discovering how to get it working that you really learn how to make iPhone apps. So that's a whole process in itself. And I think that is your best bet. You can read all the books, you can watch all the videos, but if you're not writing code as you're watching and learning, you're not going to remember anything. And the concepts aren't really going to they're not going to make sense to you because you're going to read about how auto layout works. And you're like, well, I don't understand. Well, it's about understanding what happens with auto layout. So like I just got my iPhone 6 case. So you can see it right here. It's a little bit bigger than my iPhone 5. So let me just hold that up for you. So that is the iPhone 6 versus the case. This fits in my hand. It works. I feel like my hand's a little bit cramped. I probably want the iPhone 6 at a minimum. The iPhone 6 Plus is a little bit bigger. But the thing that you have to understand with auto layout, if we take that as an example, is I want my user interface to work on this screen size, and I want it to work on my 5 screen size. And so the easiest way, instead of hard coding all of the values, is to say, well, I want buttons and labels to be relative to certain positions on the screen or relative to each other, so that when I switch screen sizes, everything just works and it can resize itself so that it sort of fits the layout that I want. So I think as you're learning, writing code, and then just keep a log of what you learn. I think a lot. It's important to write down and to be actively thinking through the concepts that you're working on learning. So write down a new word that you hear. So if auto layout is a new word that you're learning about today, I want you to write that down on your notebook or your notepad. I have tons of notepads around me. I've got one in my backpack. And let's see. Here's one on my back table. So, I mean, I write all the time in notebooks, and if you can just keep a list of words that you're learning, and then leave some space, when you learn them, then fill in the blanks. So it's a really good learning habit, and it's going to help you get started with apps. So just use a notebook, write some stuff down. It's really going to make you think more about it, just like writing code is. You're going to think about the concepts, and then you're going to start to put all these pieces together. So that's sort of the learning process that I think is effective. All right, so Kenneth, you have a question about MySQL. I'm not going to talk about a direct connection to MySQL in the first or the second course. I'm not going to talk about MySQL at all. I'm going to talk about core data in the third course, which is the iPhone app experience, which is about building an app from scratch and working with a database there. So the first 2 courses, instead of working with a database, I'm going to work with a text file or a text format file rather than a database, because I think it's easier to save and load to. Granted, these initial apps that we're going to be building in the beginner course or the game course, it's more important to save information. Like in the game course, I want to save where the spaceship is, how many lives it has left, if it has any upgrades. And I don't really need a database for that. I just need to use an easier format. And the easier format is with the archiving process in both Objective-C and Swift. So I find that simpler. You don't have to worry about coming up with a data structure or anything like that. You just make a class and then you can export it to disk and basically load it back up. So I find that the easiest place to get started with. And I won't get into MySQL just because I don't know MySQL very well. I'm familiar with SQL. I would say the thing that we're going to focus on in the third course is either going to be CloudKit or it's going to be CloudMine. And both of those are using databases under the hood, but they map your objects to the database, so you don't really have to think too much about it. And I'm not going to get into sort of technical aspects like how to join multiple sets of data efficiently or anything like that, just because that's not my specialty. There are other people who teach that on Udemy and other online courses that you can learn more about databases. I'm not an expert. I'm more of an expert on making the app, connecting it to things, and making it responsive, working with the graphics, and more of the local experience. In terms of other databases that we'll get exposed to in the third course will be core data. So that's going to be Apple's own database, which isn't MySQL. It's built on SQLite 3, I believe. And you don't really have to write any SQL statements. It just handles it for you. So that's what we'll start with there. All right. All right, so Jared has a new question about a new file that's created in Xcode. So if we were to create a new project, let me share my screen. Okay, so if we create a new project here, I just went to File, New Project. Right in here, you can choose what type of project. Now, if you want to do an iOS game, you select iOS application and then game, and then you hit next, and we'll do a simple game. So when you're first getting started, I recommend not doing SceneKit, and I think that's what you did. You did SceneKit, which is their 3D game, versus SpriteKit. So if we go ahead and we do a SpriteKit game, let's see what files we see. It looks like we do have a SKS file. Okay, and if I open that up, I'm not exactly sure what this is right now. This wasn't in the old version of Xcode, and I do need to brush up on this new scene stuff. I'm guessing that this is related to SceneKit now being integrated, and what you're doing here is seeing what this could be related to the level editor. Basically, what a scene is sort of your concept of how the game world looks. And if you look at a game, let me think. You look at a game like Tic-Tac-Toe. That's a game that can be represented on one screen. But if you look at a game like Angry Birds, you can't look at everything in Angry Birds on one screen. You have to scroll left and right. And so once you have to start dealing with content that's off screen, you start to work with these scenes. And so we have a game scene here, which if we run this app, let's see what happens. The other thing that's annoying with Xcode is you can't have multiple versions of Xcode or multiple windows of Xcode running the app. So you have to hit that stop button in the top left. I just switched between the windows here. I have the first app and the simple game. So let's go back to the simple game, and I'll hit the run button, and we'll be able to see what the game appears, what game appears. We're going to see a label, it looks like, and then we're going to see spinning spaceships. So this scene, I'm assuming, is to help with something. I think it's the level editor. I will have more details on this. I would recommend that you go to the WWDC videos. So if you go to WWDC 2004, let me switch screens. So I did a Google search, WWDC 2014, not 2004. And here you can see the session videos. Now they have a bunch on game development. So if you just do a search, you can game, and you can see best practice for building SpriteKit games. They're changing a lot of stuff. So always, if you want to be cutting edge, you can watch these videos. The one downside about these videos is while they are cutting edge, the APIs and the function names, the class names can change in the final release of iOS 8, which is launching today. So not all the code that you see necessarily works right out of the box, and sometimes you have to tweak it a little bit. With that said, this stuff should be pretty set in stone now. This is the third year, I think, that we've had the game framework. Or is this the second year? I think this is the third year. They've added new stuff each year. So looking through this list, you can see how to get started with games. You can see anything that mentions games. And you're going to want to stick to SceneKit or SpriteKit. So if you click on SpriteKit, this is probably going to explain some of the new stuff that you can work with it. All right, so I guess that's that. Let's go to the next question. One other thing I would point out, so I'll link this in the chat. The other thing that's a really good resource is if you search WWDC 2014 ASCII, ASCII. And we're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes. I don't want to go too much over an hour. So here you can search any of the things. So if I want to search anything on SpriteKit, If I want to work on a game, I can search and I can see all the text transcripts from the different presentations, and I can see where they talked about it. So it was mentioned 14 different times, and I'll just paste a link to ASCII WWDC. This is a really good resource for searching for different things. I'll have more information for you, Jared, in another update video. I'm planning on doing a couple videos on how to get started with SpriteKit before that course actually launches in November. But when it does launch in November, you'll have a lot more resources to sort of leverage and go with that. Hi, Nadir. If you haven't started much with the iPhone course and Skillshare, I would highly recommend starting this new course. I did post let's see. I did post a link to get started with Swift. I'll grab a link for it right now so that you can just get started with it right today. Let's see. So I'll post this in the chat as well. Okay, so using that link, you can watch 7 videos. I think this is a good introduction. Now, I want you to understand that these videos don't go in depth into why you're writing certain things. It's more about getting you to get your first app working and then sort of iterating on it. So the point is exposure, because if I were to explain everything and then do the app, you would get bored and you would stop. So I want to get you to a point where you have an app working right away so that you can see how it works, modify it, and then you can start to pick up on what different topics you need to learn. So I would definitely start with iOS 8. Unless you want to hit the ground running, then you can go over some of the topics on programming, especially if you're new. You can go over the Intro Objective-C course that is on Skillshare. It's the same course that I've given access to all of the backers on the second Kickstarter as well. All right, so Jonathan, or Jonathan, I don't know if I'm saying it right. So you're a designer and you have some JavaScript experience, which is good. It's not a problem. I would say any exposure to programming before you start is good. So getting started with that is great. The Swift code is going to look a lot more familiar to JavaScript than it will Objective-C, because the syntax is different in Objective-C, where you've got all of these square braces. All right, Huang, you have a question. Am I going to cover extensions in the first course? Probably not. Extensions is more of a upper level feature, and I would like to cover it, but it doesn't fit in with the first course. I need to double check on that, but I don't think it will fit in with that one. I think it could fit in with the third course, because the third course is more about building a real world application. And there's going to be some supplemental materials that I'll be creating to sort of supplement the core focus of that app that we create and sort of go over the process of. And I think extensions could fit into there if there's enough interest. So a lot of the topics in the third course are going to be based on interest from the backers on the Kickstarter project. All right, are there any more questions? I think the last question that I have, unless there's one more or two more questions, is related to Swift and Objective-C. So Huck, had a question about the pros and cons of Swift versus Objective-C. He's found that the Objective-C tutorials that he's been reading are pretty easy to understand and not super complicated. And he wants to know, why would he pursue Swift over Objective-C? And the big reason is because Apple is moving away from Objective-C to support Swift. Objective-C is a language that's 31 years old, so it's got a lot of legacy on it, and things that you do for it, there's a lot more typing, you have a lot more special characters and stuff like that, and it's based on C, so that when you have an error, sometimes you have an Objective-C error and sometimes you have a C error, and that means that you need to understand two different languages when you're working with Objective-C, so your error messages can be a little bit cryptic. So the benefit of Swift is that your error messages should be easier to understand and easier to fix. And I really think that Apple is going to stop supporting features in Objective-C in the next 2 years. So I think they're going to try to push developers to move away from Objective-C to Swift. And that's going to take a couple years to transition to, because there's a lot of open source projects that are written in Objective-C that either need to be ported or rewritten from the ground up, or wrapped in a way that is easier to use with the new Swift language. And that's kind of what Apple's doing with some of their frameworks as well. There's some modern features with Swift that I really enjoy. Working with text strings, so working with text data, anything you get from a user, anything you want to display on the screen is a lot easier. It's a lot easier to insert variables. There's this thing called string interpolation, where you can basically have inline variables into a string, and for me, that's really convenient. Let's see. The other big difference is you don't need to specify types with Swift. You can just create a variable and let the computer figure it out for you. And I think that's the way that we should be thinking about variables on our computer. We just want a place to store information. We don't really care if it's text data or number data or if it's a picture. We just want to give the computer some kind of data, and then we want to display it on the screen in a certain way. So that's another thing. Another plus with Swift is there's less special characters. So if you ever done any kind of string output with a string with format method in Objective-C, you have to type all these special tokens. They're %d, %f, %@ symbol, and you have to memorize these different things. And so that's just one more thing to memorize when you're trying to work with string data or text data. And you don't have that with Swift because of the string interpolation, where you can just insert a variable into a text string and it will just work. Another big thing with Swift is that it's faster. So it is faster than Objective-C because it doesn't have all of the runtime stuff that Objective-C has, and it's got some more optimizations that can make the code run faster. So if you got complex algorithms, they're potentially going to run faster. Now, I think the last thing I looked at, C code is still faster than Swift, but when you're dropping into C, you don't get a lot of the benefits of Swift, which are all the modern things that will make it easier to test it, debug it, fix problems, use open source code. Basically, Swift is going to help you get an app out the door faster than if you did the whole thing in C and then wrapped it up with Swift. There's way more APIs and stuff to use. And the last big thing I would say with Swift is that it's safer. So it's doing more type checking, which is making sure that the data that you're trying to use in different scenarios is the right data, and it's going to error out if something's wrong. So it's going to help you not shoot yourself in the foot as much. Now, there's still going to be a learning curve with it. So even with all of the safety and all of the different things, like, you still have to understand how the language works. So that's only going to happen with more practice and reading about it and learning how the different things work. All right, we have one more question from Kenneth before we wrap up. He wants to know if I'll cover anything about localization. I may cover localization in the third course, but I'm not sure I will. There's just so many topics to talk about. I think that's a good one, but I don't think it's as important as learning some of the other things that help you get the app working. So localization is something you can always add after the fact, and I could potentially do a follow-up course on that, but I don't want to commit to that just yet. So we'll see if that's something that everyone wants for the Kickstarter third course, then we can get into that. For now, I think it's best to start in English or your native language and to just ship the app that way and then work on adding support at a later time. Because I mean, you're going to have costs for localizing the stuff. And I'll be honest, when you first launch an app, you're not guaranteed to get a whole lot of downloads. So if you're spending hundreds or thousands of dollars to localize the app, it's kind of going to be a waste of money if your app's not going to take off. And I would only add it if you're comfortable with supporting the cost or you want to learn something from it. All right, so thank you for watching. I hope that some of these questions and answers were beneficial to you. I'm sorry that I didn't have my fancy camera working. My computer didn't want to see it with Google Hangouts, but we'll try to get that sorted out next time. It looks like Hangouts has changed some things, so that I have to learn how to use it more effectively. All right, so I will catch you guys later. Again, if you have any questions, you can always message me on email. It's paulsolt@iphonedev.tv. I'm not sure if I can make that pop up on the screen. So I had it up on the screen earlier before we started. This should turn it on, but that looks backwards. That might be forwards. So just email me at paulsolt@iphonedev.tv, and you can follow up with any of these questions. If you have more questions based on these questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And if you have any comments on the current set of videos that I'm doing for the Swift courses, I'm also interested in getting your feedback, because these courses that I'm publishing next month and the month after are going to be related based on your feedback. So if you have stuff that you think I could be doing better, or if you have things that you want to learn, let me know so that I can add it to the list, and we'll have some votes with the Kickstarter backers to sort of pick the direction we want to go with these upcoming courses. All right, thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys later.